hello all. Thank you for joining today for this short webinar on OneScore, Profet-ai's ability to assess appraisal complexity using the data and insights that we have built out. Yeah. So it's a feature as part of Market Conditions Advisor, and we would like to show you how it works inside MCA, the Market Conditions Advisor product for appraisers and AMCs, and answer any questions you might have. A quick intro on the speakers today at the webinar. My name is Umesh Harigopal. I'm the CEO of Profet-ai, and I have with me Daniel Mancino, VP of Data Solutions. Danny, you want to say hi?
Good afternoon, everybody. How are you today? Please call me Danny. I would appreciate that. Daniel is a little bit too formal, but good to be with you. I'm excited to share with you the capabilities of OneScore, and hopefully you find this interesting. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you,
Take it away, Mesh.
Sure. So appraisal complexity metric, what we call OneScore. Our primary goal here is to help lenders and appraisers as well as AMCs to understand the complexity in a residential appraisal before they get going on doing the appraisal itself. So there are many reasons for that. Like I said, we want to know the valuation complexity, but then why do I want to know the valuation complexity? A few reasons. We want to be able to set the cost of an appraisal. There is the whole TRID compliance rules that says that you cannot change the cost of an appraisal, the appraisal fees, once you have disclosed that to the borrower, right? So one of the reasons that you would want to do this. And other operational reasons, like matching the best appraiser for a particular job. If you think it's a complex appraisal, then you might want to give it to a more experienced appraiser on your team. Or if you're a lender, you might want to find an AMC that is best suited for these kind of activities for you. So those are reasons why you would want to kind of want to know the complexity of a particular appraisal upfront as well, right? In addition, it also is a good indicator of the risk in the value that you're going to get ultimately. So that directly translates to collateral risk for underwriters to know what is the risk and the value that has been put on the property, right? The complexity, the higher the complexity, maybe is slightly more risky the valuation itself is, right? So those are some of the reasons that we have heard from our clients asking for appraisal complexity metric as a feature inside MCA. And so our team spent quite a number of evenings and weekends to get this done, and want to give you a quick idea on how that complexity is computed. Danny is going to help you walk through some examples as well in a minute. But at a high level, we will touch upon each of these things as we kind of walk you through the demo. But some of the major criteria that we use to arrive at a complexity score is looking at the market around the property, seeing is there enough transaction volume in the last 12 months to support a good appraisal. And when you look at the market transactions, we want to find comparable sales to the subject property and see are there enough number of comps, and also look at the type of those sales. I mean, are they distressed sales? Are they transactions within the family, like non-arm's length transactions, or really arm's length transactions, right? So those kind of things give us a good feel for is there a good amount of comparable sale data that we can use towards doing evaluation ultimately, right? And another one is also seeing how different is the property compared to the market, compared to the whole neighborhood. When we say market, we're typically looking at a small neighborhood around the subject property. And we also want to check how different is it, how different is the subject property to its closest comparables as well, right? So that is looking at is it really very recently built compared to all other properties in the market, or is it like a 5,000 square foot home in a market where most of the properties are 2,000 square feet? is it like a 3-storied building in a mostly ranch-style home area, things like that. That helps us understand how different the comp is, or different the subject is compared to the comparables in the market. And another item that we also look for is the proximity of those comps. Each of these things we also consider the area, meaning is it urban, suburban, or rural, to kind of put those kind of limits around proximity. So we expect in urban areas much more closer comps, as opposed to when you go to rural areas, we expect the comps to be maybe 10 miles away from the home, which is okay, which is still acceptable for doing evaluation, right? And the final item is the recency of the comparables. That is, where most of the sales 9 months old, and I got only one sale in the last 3 months, as opposed to most of the sales are 3 months old, and I got very few sales like 12 months back, which is not so bad, right? So we want to look at those kind of information as well to figure out how much more work is it going to take for an appraiser to finish their job. So what comes out ultimately is a complexity score, like you see on the left-hand side here, on a scale of like 1 to 100, and a lot more detail that backs up why we arrived at a complexity score of 25 for a particular property or 85 for another property, etc. Right? So without much further ado, we will jump into showing you a quick demo of how this works. And Danny, I'm going to.
While you're transitioning, I was just
sure.
Yeah. Okay. I was just going to say, while you're transitioning over to do the demo, or to bring up the demo screen, I wanted to also point out that, recency, proximity, all of that information, we're able to do that because of the relationships that we have with the MLSs. So you're not necessarily dealing with dated or stale data from the assessor's office, because we all know that, depending on where you are, the assessor could be anywhere from a couple of days to, in some cases, 6 to 8 months behind the actual recordings to make it available. So having the listing data available to run the analytics off of is a key.
Yep, that is actually a very good point, Danny. Having the listing stored in our database helps us do all this analysis, as opposed to just searching on the MLS alone for each of these subject properties, right? So, great. So, Danny, should I just start with? I'm going to run the screen for you here. So, you give me an address, and I start entering it here.
Okay, so I want to kind of walk through a typical property, and you're going to be looking actually in my neighborhood. So if you can pull up 3 South Coachman Drive. Freehold.
Is it south or no?
There
south?
it is.
Coachman.
Well, it'll come up. Yeah.
All right.
Change that over to complexity report.
And we'll still continue.
The simple here is,
good.
Yeah, exactly. So when you bring up the address, you find the address, you have the option of reviewing the property before you even run the report, or you can dive right into the report. And you see that this here property is a Center Hall Colonial. It's right around the corner from my house. It's fairly typical for the neighborhood. So if you're looking at the characteristics, the size of the property, number of bedrooms, bathrooms, this is pretty typical of our neighborhood. You'll notice there also that there's a couple of different shadings on some of those fields, and there's a legend above. So it shows you if there's a mismatch between what the MLS is showing and what the public record is showing. Sometimes you might want to use public record, sometimes you might want to use the MLS. So you have the option of changing that here. So if you changed it, it will be what would be used for the complexity report, or you can just move forward with the data as is. And if you click on next to get complexity report. It's as simple as, you pull up the property, and after a few seconds, it'll come back. It'll give you the score based on a number of criteria. So in this case here, it brought back a 41. So which would be, low to mid complex. In this case here, it looked at about 2.2 miles and 12 months. There were more than 200 total properties, of which it found 30 of them to be nearby comparables. And Ramesh could talk specifically to how the scores are derived, but you'll see that there's a lot of evidence that is presented as you move through the report to back it all up. So here again is the characteristics of the property that we were working with. At this point, everything is locked in. You wouldn't be able to change anything here. However, the next page will give you the score details. So what it does is it runs an analysis on the 30 comps that it found, or if it found 8 comps or 18 comps, it'll run an analysis. It'll tell you how the property compares to the comps that it found. And then based on how typical or atypical it is for the neighborhood, is that property normal, or those characteristics normal for the neighborhood, that helps to derive the score. We also do the same with the market. So now we're not only looking at the comparables, but we're looking at the entirety of the 200 plus comps that it found and run that same analysis. And you'll see here, the only thing that is slightly off is the bedrooms in this case here. We find that everything else seems to be pretty normal for the market. Now, you may also notice that the bathrooms. You may notice that the market average says 2.29 for the bathroom, but 3 for the subject. The reality is, based on listing data, that's probably not accurate, only because I know my market. But that's the thing, you'll know your market, the appraiser is going to know their market. And that 3 is probably more typical for the market than 2.29 would be. So, but based on the fact that we've got 4 out of 5 are pretty much spot on, we find them to have a very low variance, very close to the market, and also same thing would be close to the comps. 41, as I mentioned, low risk, low to mid risk. I think we're pretty good on this property to move forward. We then on the next page will show you the comps that we used and how they compare in proximity. You've got all of the details that we used. You'll notice that the GLA on that property as compared to all the other ones is, for the most part, in line. Same thing with the bedrooms and bathrooms and lot size. And Mesh, if you can move on to the next page.
And the proximity, the distance is here on the rightmost column.
The proximity is all off to the right, yeah. And on top of everything else, we also will provide a flood map and flood zone information. So if there is any question about the complexity of this property, you notice that where that property is located, if you were on the other side of the street, maybe a house or 2 in, there's that possibility of a flood zone on that side of the street. Again, I know the market, it's a little bit higher up. So your chances of flooding are lower, but the information is there. We provide all of that information for you to make the decision. So with that said, maybe we can move on to something that's a little bit more complex. I won't go through all of the details, but I want to show you how we're determining something that's a little bit more on the complex side. So in this case here, Mesh, the property address is 1 Woodstock Place. Now, one thing I want you to take a look at is, you see, this is more or less the same property, but take a quick look at the living area on this property. It's the same model, but there's a significant difference in the living area on this property as compared to the other one that we just looked at. Same model. Also scroll down and mesh if you could. One thing that you'll notice when you go all the way down to the map, the street map, that's the other thing that we didn't touch on a moment ago, that we do have all the images that you can view. And you see this property, it looks like a beautiful property. If you zoom out the mesh, you'll notice it's on a main road, and it's also directly across the street from a high school. That's not something that you would typically pick up just from raw data, but we give you all the information to make your decisions right inside the application. Now, that said, proximity, all the other things will come into play. So let's move forward with this report to the next page. So you may remember that the previous property in the same neighborhood found 30 comps that it found comparable in that same 2.2 mile radius. In this case here, because of the size of the property, because of the fact that that property is atypical for its neighborhood, it has an addition, it doesn't have a garage. The garage was completely built out for square footage. They put an addition on in the back of the home. This house is not your normal house for this property. I mean, for this neighborhood. So you go out 2 miles and you only find one comp in this case, and therefore your complexity is much higher. We would find that anything up in that high 80s into the 90s would be considered highly complex, and definitely is going to require a look from an inspector or a full-blown appraisal. So let's take a look at the score details. So again, here, so if we're looking at the comps, again, there wasn't enough comps available. We need to have at least a handful of comps for us to run an analysis. But if we look at the market, you can see that this property in that 2.2 mile radius, it is pretty different, pretty significantly different from the rest of the market. So you see all of the X's off to the right, not normal for the area. And I think that the evidence, the data itself, the number of bedrooms compared to the market, the number of bathrooms, square footage, it seems like the only thing that's in line is the lot size, and they were all built in the same year or in the same time. So this property clearly is same neighborhood, completely different as far as the complexity is concerned. So the one house that it found is in a different neighborhood on the other side of town.
So then finally we can export.
And as far as
data, right?
Yes.
So the export option usually.
Thanks for pointing that out to us. Right.
And let me just kick off that export. It is saving somewhere. There we go.
So you get a complete report in PDF.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Amish.
No, I'm going to say something, including all the listing sheets on the subject, as well as a detailed list of all the comps that we found. In this case, it happens to be only one comp that was found, but you would have a list of all the comps, the top 30 comps maximum that was found as good comparables for the property. So there we go. So that is the.
And again, this property.
Good.
I was going to say this property does have a lack of sufficient comps in the neighborhood. The other property had plenty of sufficient comps for the neighborhood. If you run the complexity report, you can export it as a PDF. There's also an XML option. So if you wanted to take the data out and load it into another application, you could do that as well. So 3 Coachman.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing that you just saw that Amesh did there is you have a dashboard that you can go back and review or edit any of the reports that you had previously run. If you forgot to print out a report, PDF supporting documentation, or if you wanted to, get the XML, You can get it from the dashboard. It'll give you a summary of what it found, how many comps, what the score was. And then the other nice thing is you can go right from here. Once you've determined whether or not it's a report that you're going to, or an appraisal that you're going to move forward with, using the same order ID, you can move right into an appraisal order report, and go and get all your comps, load all of that information into an appraisal order form. Software, ACI, SFREP, it'll work with a la mode. I believe it will also work with Bradford, the cook forms. And so you've got a complete end-to-end solution. Run your complexity, determine whether or not this is a report that you want to use. A product you want to use as far as an appraisal or a desktop appraisal. And then you can move right into getting the appraisal completed right within the same application.
Great. Thanks, Danny. Thank you. I think that is the main part of our demo that we wanted to show you. And there were a couple of quick questions that have kind of come up from participants here. Let me just get to one of them here quickly. How does this information integrate with any other software that we have? I think that's the question that's coming up, and I'm trying to summarize that. Like Danny was just mentioning a minute ago, we do have an XML output for this, which can be pulled into any other AMC platform that it can integrate into. So that is pretty straightforward. Yeah, just wanted to let you know that there's no standard for the complexity score like a MISMO XML or anything like that. So this is our proprietary XML. But if you have any specific XML or JSON format, we can always produce that as well. Yeah. I just want to address that quick question, Danny. And let me see.
And the other thing is, to that point about software and stuff. So we've also got integrations that we've done with a number of companies where you can log in seamlessly with a single sign-on from within an application, such as an ACI or an SFREP, Appraiser Pro, and there are a couple of AMCs, or quite a few AMCs that are also logging directly in here. So if you've got an AMC that you wanted to connect to this application for either the complexity report or the full suite, that's something we could talk about as well.
All right. Another question is, maybe you can take this one, Danny. What is the coverage for this for this complexity score? I think I'll rephrase it as: is it available? Or which parts of the country, etc.
We do have coverage nationwide, coverage in all 50 states. There are a handful of markets here and there where the MLS coverage is not as strong as most other areas, but every major metro, with the exception of one or two, is fully covered. We do have public record information, full nationwide, all 50 states, and 99.99% coverage. I would say that from a listing perspective, we've got north of 90% coverage on the listing side as well. So if you have any specific MLSs that you're curious about, feel free to reach out to us and we can confirm. And if it's not an MLS that we currently cover, we can reach out to that MLS and see if we could add it.
Perfect. And I think there is one other question here asking about property subtypes. Do we handle other property subtypes like, the specific question here is asking about multifamilies. I can
try so the application.
Yeah, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, go ahead. Well, I was going to say the application will, any property that you bring up, the application will find the property if it's listed, or, we could find the public record. But as far as running a comp search, it's gonna search for same type properties. As far as the appraisal software is concerned, the appraisal software supports single-family condos, townhomes, basically anything 1 to 4 related, multifamily. But then there's also, obviously some outlier type of properties that we may not be able to run the full report on. But Mesh could talk more in more detail to how we standardize the property types.
I don't know. You actually hit it on the head, Danny, already. That's good. So yeah, like Danny said, we do standardize the property types, and we would match when we find the comps. We're only finding comps based on the best matches based on number of units as well as is it multifamily or what number of units and GLA and all that, the same type of attributes that we use to measure variance from subject property to comparable properties. And so that would kind of match up pretty well. And let me see here, are there any other questions? Oh, yeah, another question is here, how does billing work if I think you mentioned somewhere that it goes from complexity score report can be then the same order can be reused for appraisal report kind of thing. I think that's where the question is coming up from. How does it work for billing purposes?
Well, the complexity report would be its own standalone report or its own standalone product. The appraisal is also a standalone product, but if you use the same order ID for both, for the same property address, because that's the key, it's got to be the same order ID and the same property address or subject property address. If you do order both, then the combined order would be discounted, and that would all depend on volume. But complexity is one report, appraisal is one report, combined they could be one unified report, and for billing purposes.
I'd just like to add to that also that each of these reports are valid for 30 days. So if you start a complexity report, it is valid for 30 days for you to come back and retry, do anything with that complexity report. The same thing with appraisal reports as well. All our appraisal reports are valid for 30 days. You can do any number of calls, any number of times you can rerun the same appraisal report within the 30-day period. It's one price. Yeah. So great. I think that's all the questions I'm seeing here coming in. So I think that's a wrap, I guess. And Danny, thank you very much for kind of walking us through this quick demo here. Hopefully it was very useful for everybody to kind of get a quick glimpse on complexity report. We are here to answer any questions you might have. So please ping us anytime to get more questions answered, and hopefully you'll knock on our doors as well, like other clients have been asking for a complexity report to kind of make use of this. Thank you again, everyone. I appreciate it.
Thank you.